Welcome to the Melvin Breakdown, where we take a look at a new Magic the Gathering mechanic, or look back at an old one and see how it holds up. Today we're looking at Convoke, a returning mechanic from Guilds of Ravnica. The Selesnya Conclave has seen previous success with Convoke, but does it make the desired splash? Let's take a look. Please note, this isn't strictly a review. We examine our mechanics on the following 4 criteria: utility, resonance, prevalence, and power. Some of these might be more important to you as a player than others, and you can draw your own conclusions from what we discover. But let's start with how it works. Convoke is a keyword that refers to a static ability which functions on the stack, that strange ephemeral place where cards go to be cast. Static ability just means always on, as opposed to a triggered ability which has specific conditions. Convoke means, for each coloured mana in this spell's total cost, you may tap an untapped creature of that colour you control rather than pay that mana. For each generic mana in this spell's total cost, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay that mana. That's kind of a mouthful, which is why Convoke is one of the few mechanics whose reminder text contains a completely extraneous sentence. The reminder text for Convoke reads, "Your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for 1 generic mana or 1 mana of that creature's colour." Let's say I want to cast Siege Worm, and why wouldn't I? Normally he costs a whopping 7 mana, but I only have 3 lands. Luckily I have 4 creatures, somehow, so by casting Siege Worm and tapping all 4 creatures, each of them pays for 1. Then I pay the rest with mana and our worm friend is cast. Siege Worm is the iconic Convoke card, which is why I use it for an example. It's the only card with Convoke to be reprinted in all 3 standard legal sets which featured the mechanic. Those are Ravnica, City of Guilds in 2005, Magic 2015 in 2014, and Guilds of Ravnica in 2018. This video will focus mostly on its appearance in the newest set, but will occasionally make reference to its history. Convoke joins the distinguished family of cost reduction mechanics, such as Delve, Improvise, and Affinity. Generally, cost reduction mechanics appear very versatile, as they can go on any kind of spell. Any game of Magic is going to cast spells, and is therefore going to be interested in cheaper ones. In reality, this can verge on mechanics becoming broken, as Delve and Affinity have proven. Convoke dodges this bullet by being all about creatures. It's harder to break Convoke because you have to set up a board state first, and the worst thing you can do with it is make some specific spells free, some of the time. There are lots of decisions being made as to when to use creatures versus mana, but more often than not the right decision is spelled out for you. You generally want to keep 1 creature untapped for Living Totem, so you can swing in with the extra power. On the other hand, anyone tapping any lands to cast Venerated Loxodon is certainly doing it wrong. What's more, the results of casting a Convoke spell aren't particularly variable, the spell just resolves. Even if there isn't a ton of decision space in using Convoke, there is a ton of design space left. In 2012, Mark Rosewater described Convoke as the design with the most potential for future use out of the original 10 from Ravnica, and that was emphasised when Magic 2015 moved the mechanic into blue, black and red. Selesnya still got the bulk of the cards, but it's a good sign for a mechanic when it can find a home in all 5 colours. The flavour of Convoke is about as straightforward as it gets, using the potential of your creatures, represented by them being untapped, to cast magical spells. Luckily, that means people tend to get to grips with it right away. If I'm explaining Convoke, I'll just say, it's like your creatures are lands, but just for this spell, and they get it. The only potential confusion arises when you factor in Summoning Sickness, but it's not a bad mistake because it doesn't actually break the game. Compare that with Mentor, where stack triggers can really confuse matters, and it seems less destructive. It's interesting to note that Convoke was created by Richard Garfield in his work on the design team of Ravnica's City of Guilds, but he originally intended it for the Boros Legion. You can see the flavour working there too, the army that comes together to strengthen one another, and that's kind of a failing of the flavour. Again, now that it's a 5-colour mechanic, it's clear that it could fit anywhere, and that the concept of working together is not unique to Selesnya like the concept of surveillance is to Dimir. Convoke has a fair few cards in the set, and it's certainly not difficult to build a green-white deck around some of the stronger ones. Like I said in my Surveil video, a successful faction-based set needs a minimum amount of attention on each faction to work at all, so there's a lot of Convoke. Unlike Surveil, Selesnya isn't quite so single-minded in its pursuits. As well as making certain spells cheaper, there's a token theme, a few different anthems, and even some life gain that crosses over with the Golgari. Mostly though, Selesnya keeps to itself, not really crossing over into the other guilds all that much. Convoke has uses for all the guilds, in that they're all likely to have some creatures with which to convoke, but with the exception of Conclave Tribunal in white and maybe Sprouting Renewal in green, I can't see much need for the Boros or Golgari decks to include them. Zooming out, we can see that of the two sister guilds, Boros has the most in common with Selesnya. There's a shared focus on flying there, as well as incidental lifelink in the marvellous Healer's Hawk, a very popular pick for both guilds. Nobody's going to be building any Naya decks in Limited anytime soon, but Selesnya is stable enough on its own that Convoke sees plenty of play. Convoke is a bomb-focused mechanic, given that its win conditions are almost exclusively big dudes. Seriously, there's a lot of big dudes. I am drowning under big dudes. But there's nothing wrong with that. Serious threats like Arboretum Elemental can close out a game fast. For the go wide strategy, there's also Trostani Discordant, a powerful card that costs just a little too much, and March of the Multitudes, which has had the most attention put on it thus far. X-cost Convoke has been done before, but this is the most rewarding expression of it, especially in a deck that's already spewing out creatures. On Channel Fireball, Martin User detailed a possible Selesnya aggro deck, and in a list of cards you should be focused on, named just one Convoke card, Rosemane Centaur. And it's not that the other cards are bad, it's just that everything else that's going on is a little better. Convoke deserved to come back, certainly more than any of the other mechanics from original Ravnica. The cards themselves aren't going to do everything you need, and that's fine, because there's still a lot to get excited about around the mechanic. If you love token strategies, then you're going to love Selesnya's cards, and hey, maybe you'll throw a Convoke card in there too. When Convoke comes back, and I'm confident that it won't be too long, I'd like to see it in the other colours again, in black and red especially. I can imagine all sorts of unique effects that could lead to some really strong, but not necessarily broken, Convoke decks. We're just not quite there yet.